welcome back to another AnyRPG Development Livestream. In this series, you can watch the live development of the AnyRPG Engine, a free and open source role-playing game engine designed in Unity and written in C#. If you don't already have a copy of AnyRPG, you can pick one up from anyrpg.org/downloads in both Unity package and source code format. You can also download A Lost Soul, the free playable game that I work on in these episodes, at the same page. In this episode, we will be enhancing our item drop system that we've been working on in the last few episodes. We added gold scaling and reward scaling, and now it's time to turn our attention to the crafting system and add recipes as a drop. So right now in the game, I will demonstrate the current state of the crafting system, and the crafting system at this point is made in such a way that basically every recipe is available all the time as soon as you learn a crafting skill. So you can see here, if I take my character over here to the anvil and I look at it and I pull up the blacksmithing list, even though my character is only level 11, he sees all the ancient plate armor, which is like level 20 gear basically, and he sees all of the basically all of every recipe in the game. And so I want to make two enhancements to this right now. We've got two sets basically. We've got this green initiates gear, and this stuff should be automatically learned at a certain level. So the initiates should be learned as soon as you learn blacksmithing, the novices should be learned at like level 8, and the apprentices stuff should be learned at like level, I don't know, 12 or something like that. Then we have the drops, like this ancient gear, and this is actually dungeon gear, so I want the recipes for these to drop in dungeons. So we'll actually need recipe drop items for those. So we'll basically need to make those two enhancements to our crafting system. And since recipes can drop and we don't automatically know recipes anymore, that means we'll also have to have a way to track and save known recipes. So we have something already that does a very similar thing called the character skill manager that basically tracks like what skills you've learned. So I'm just going to make a duplicate of this, and we'll have a character recipe manager to store the recipes that the character knows from now on, because currently that list is just grabbing all the recipes in the system and showing them for us. So let's go ahead and get started on that. So I guess the first thing that we need to do is we'll start by making the character recipe manager. So for that, we'll just go to the character skill manager. We'll hit Control D to duplicate it, and we'll make a character recipe manager. Double click to open that up and call it a character recipe manager. We'll save that, go back into Unity, make sure all those errors go away. Okay, good. So now what we want to do is we want to go to the player connection, which is where we have all the objects, including the skill managers and faction and currency and stuff. So we're just going to add that component here, and we'll be adding the character recipe manager. Okay, so now our character has a way to store his recipes. So then what we want to do is, right now this is currently storing skills. We want to make it store recipes instead. So I think the easiest way to do this is just going to be do a search, make it case sensitive, replace the word skill with recipe, find the next instance and just start replacing this looks good. Pretty much everywhere where the word skill is, yeah, we can just replace these all with the word recipe, basically. Okay, good. And then we want to do that for the lowercase versions of these. Okay, good. So then let's see. It looks like we missed that one instance right there. And we have a couple of problems. Okay, so first of all, let's actually, okay, so recipe basically needs a required level property. And also it needs this auto learn property. So let's go to the recipe class here. And might as well just put it like right at the top here. So I'll make a new header. We'll put recipe and make a new serialized field and private bool auto learn. And we'll just set that to false for now. And we'll put a tooltip on this to let people know exactly what it does. So if true, this recipe is automatically learned at the appropriate level. So I'll put another header down here just to separate the crafting section. Call it crafting. All right, good. And we need another field here. And this will be a private int required level. And we'll just make it 1 by default. We'll serialize the field. And we'll add a tooltip here. The level that is required to learn this recipe. Save all that. And then we will want to expose these. So quick actions and refactoring, encapsulate field, quick actions and refactoring, encapsulate field, and save that. And then we'll want to go into the character recipe manager and just set this so it's required level and auto learn. We don't need to learn abilities because we're just learning the recipe. With skills, you learn abilities as well. I'm going to check what exactly the code was doing for notify on skill list changed. So first I just want to change a couple field names. I'm just going to rename this to required level. I'm going to rename this to auto learn. And then I want to go find all references to notify on skill list changed. Go to the definition, find all references to on skill list changed, and see who's looking at this. Trade skill prerequisites. Okay, we don't need to worry about that because recipes aren't prerequisites for anything. Trade skill objectives, same deal. Recipes are not currently objectives, and we're not going to make them objectives. And skill trainer. Let's see, our skill trainer. He takes our handle skill list changed. So we may want to notify when the recipe list is changed, so that if we have like a crafting window open, it will show the updates. So let's see here. If I'm going to do that, I'm going to do it a little bit differently. We have the new system event manager methods here, and I'm going to use the new ones. So we have system event manager dot trigger event, and trigger event takes an event name, and we'll call it on recipe list changed, and it takes an event param properties, so we'll just send in a new empty event param properties for now. Nobody's going to be listening to this currently, but we'll just send it anyway. And actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to actually fill the event param property with the information about that thing. So we'll actually make this object here, and then we'll set it object params, simple params. Yeah, it's simple params dot string param equals, and in this case that will be the new recipe dot my display name, and then we'll just send through that object that we just created here. Okay, great. So now basically what happens is this object right here can just carry floats, ints, strings, or objects, and we're just setting the string that it carries to the name of the recipe, so that whoever ends up listening to this eventually can look inside this object, look up the string, and do something about it if it needs to. Okay, good. So now I think that settles our character recipe manager. All right, good. So next thing that we need to do, now that we have a way to learn recipes, load recipes, and save, or store recipes, is save them. So with our save game data here, we have this struct called AnyRPG save data, and we'll need to add some recipe data to that as well. So I'm going to make a new list of recipe save data, call it recipe save data, and then I actually need to go find the recipe save data and make it. So I got the skill save data struct right here. We'll use a very similar struct. We'll just copy this one right here, and we will call this recipe save data, and basically that's it. That's all we're going to do. Just save the recipe's name. Okay, good. So now we have a way to save the recipes, and like a data structure to save them in. Now all we need to do is just go into our save manager where we save and load everything, and then find every place where we save and load skill data, and then save and load the reputation data right after, the recipe data right after it. So here we'll just change that to recipe save data and recipe save data. And we've got this function here, save skill data. So we're just going to copy that, make save recipe data. And this skill name here, we're just going to rename that to recipe name. And this needs to be recipe save data and recipe save data. And this is here, we actually need a reference to the character recipe manager. Now, this is interesting here because we won't have a reference to it through playermanager.myCharacter. You know what? Maybe we will. Let's actually just go to the definition of that. Yeah, okay, so the player manager actually does keep a reference to the player character object. Perfect. So we're going to go to the player character object, and where we have our player currency manager, this is a perfect example of something that other classes don't have. So we will have a reference to a player recipe manager, call it the player recipe manager. And I think I need a lowercase p there. And in fact, this is actually a character recipe manager, right? Which is why that's not working. Okay, there we go. Now, here, we will grab a reference to our player recipe manager. Actually, we're getting the character recipe manager. And we'll write a note here if we can't find it that our player recipe manager is null. Okay, good. So now we have a way to grab our recipe data. So here, this will be the player recipe manager. I'm just going to rename that. And then here, we have my recipe list, and I'm also just going to rename that. Okay, good. So now we have a way to save the recipe data. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is actually load the recipe data. Now, one thing that I did notice here is we've got a load recipe, learn recipe. Load recipe, there we go. You know what, load recipe is fine because, yeah, load recipe is fine. Okay, great. So we'll go back to the save manager and we'll just keep on looking for skill. And here we have load skill data. So we will do the same thing. We'll have load recipe data. And for each recipe save data. Recipe save data in AnyRPG save data dot recipe save data. My character dot player recipe manager dot load recipe based on the recipe save data dot my name. Perfect. So now we want to find where those are actually called. Oh, you know what? I still have, that's why. Okay. So here we load our skill data, and we'll just call load recipe data before that. And then similarly, there will be a call somewhere to save skill data. And then we will save recipe data right after that. Okay, great. So now we should be able to successfully save and load skills, and we have a way to learn them, but we do not yet have a method to actually call that way to learn them. So let's add that. So when we learn a skill, actually, you know what's really funny is this code that I went through here and I erased. We're actually going to do something very similar to this. So when we learn the recipe, we actually need, oops, character recipe. No, that's not what we want to do. Okay. There. It's actually right here that we want to do this. So basically, when we learn the skill, we want to learn all the abilities that come with that skill, and we also want to learn all the recipes that come with that skill. So to do that, I think we need to search actually through the entire system recipe list. So for each recipe in system recipe manager.myInstance.get resource list, and that will give us a list of every recipe in the system. Okay, now we need to do some checking. Basically, if and skills are not learned by anything other than players, so that's actually fine. Although we have my base character right here, so why don't we just refer to it that way? So basically, if my base character dot my character stats dot level is greater than equal to recipe dot required level, and recipe dot auto learn is true, and recipe dot it's actually my craftability. Do we not have? Okay, let me just go take a look at the recipe, because we might not actually track recipes directly back to skills. So let's just go check that. So if we look at any recipe, like our ancient broadsword recipe, we have our craft ability name as blacksmithing. but we don't actually have the skill. Okay, so I believe, what's the best way to do this? We can track it back against the My Ability list, which we already have. So if we have, this is the new skill, dot my ability list dot contains, and we're looking for the recipe dot my display name. No, recipe dot, sorry, my craft ability. And this is looking for base abilities, but I think that'll be fine. Okay. I think that'll work. So then what we want to do is, if all that stuff is true, then we want, and actually in this case, we actually do want the player character. And the reason is because my base character isn't a player character, so it won't have a reference to the recipe manager. So we'll go player manager dot my instance dot my character dot my player recipe manager and dot learn recipe, sending in the recipe. Okay. That looks okay. That should allow us to learn all the recipes. Now, what we also have to do is, when our character levels up, we need to basically do the same thing. So right now, when our character levels up, they'll actually go through like the entire system ability list and learn any abilities that are set to auto learn. So let's go and just see where that code is handled. I think it may be in either the character ability manager or potentially the base character. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to check actually set level. Character stats, we have a set level method. We then call onLevelChanged. And let's just see who's subscribing to that. The unit frame controller is subscribing to that. Okay, you know how we can do this actually really easy? We can just look for learnability and just see where it's called. Because we will call this learnability from whatever thing is handling. Ah, there it is, perfect, right there. Update ability list on new level. Okay, there we go. So we are subscribing to the system event managers on level changed, basically. So we'll do the same thing. In the player or character recipe manager, I'm actually going to make an override called the player recipe manager so that we can subscribe to that, because it doesn't make sense to do it inside the character recipe manager. So we'll make player recipe manager. We'll open that up, call it player recipe manager. And then basically delete everything that isn't part of this cleanup event subscriptions or on disable. And here we had some overrides on learnability and unlearnability, and that was to remove them from our bars. We don't need to worry about that because we won't have recipes available to go on our bars. This is the updatability list here that we'll be basically using as our template. We don't have coroutines, we don't cast. We don't have to worry about any of this spawning, despawning, begin ability stuff. Okay, so this looks like a pretty good shell for our recipe manager. We don't need to worry about any of that stuff right there. All we care about is the update ability list, which will be update recipe list. Okay, so then we'll add into the character ability manager the character recipe manager, the update recipe list function. Oh, right, there we go. Yeah, we already did it. It's already in there. Okay, good. So that looks good, actually. We just need to make this a virtual. So we'll have it in the recipe manager, but we will public override void update recipe list, public virtual void, and that's because this needs to override the character recipe manager. Okay, and we're not calling create event subscriptions. We are actually, so what we need to do is make these virtual. And we actually don't need to do anything in the base ones. But we do need a Boolean called event subscriptions initialized. And it should be protected. Okay, I think that's good. I think that'll do what we need it to. So then what should happen is basically our character should auto-learn any recipes and we need to add one more condition in here, and that is that, and let's see, we actually want to do this for all skills. To do that, what we need is to basically loop through the skills and see if this is included in a skill that the player knows. So we need to get the character skill manager dot my skill list dot values, and then we need to put this code inside here. And if the character does not have the recipe and the recipe.required level is less than equal to the level and the recipe.autolearn is true and the skill.abilitylist.contains our recipe dot my craftability. Okay. That, I think, will do it. So let's just go back into Unity here and see if it compiles. Okay, good. It compiles. So then let's go and make some changes to some of our recipes to make them available at higher levels, and then we can confirm that this is working by jumping back on that character. So with our blacksmithing, I want our ancient plate to not be auto-learned. Good. I want our apprentice's plate to be auto-learned, but not until level 12. I want our initiate stuff to be auto-learnable at level 1. The miners will not be auto-learnable like the ancient. These are drops. And the novices should become available at about level 8, about the same time you're ready to go into the mine. That looks good. Let's save that. Let's load up our character and check if his recipe list is smaller yet. Okay, so one thing that I totally forgot here is when I open up this blacksmithing UI, I didn't check the character's recipe list. I actually checked the system recipe list. So we'll actually need to fix that UI. So what is this going to be? This is the just crafting UI. And we have the show recipes code here. We have show recipes common. So this is kind of neat. We send in craftability, but we ignore it. Okay. So this is where we're getting the list from the system recipe manager. What we actually want to do is get the list from the character. And we'll want to match it to the craftability, which we already set when we called view recipes. Okay, so here, this will be the player manager dot my instance dot my character dot player recipe manager dot recipe list. Dot values. And here we want to say if, whoops, craftability is equal to recipe.craftability, then we're going to add it. So we'll save that. Just make sure there's no issues with that. And it has compiled okay. That's good news. So let's press play again and see if this time we get the list of recipes that the character actually knows. Okay, perfect. There we go. That's it. Initiates plate armor. Excellent. So we have some more recipes we can learn at level 12. And I'm literally like 1 kill away from level 12 here. So I think I'm just going to go nuke this zombie here. And looks like I was 2 kills away from level 12. We just got to go find one more mob to kill. Happen there. So what we need to do is let's write some debug messages and just make sure that this stuff is even being called correctly. So we're going to look at the player recipe manager.create event subscriptions. And we want to make sure that update recipe list is being called. And then in the character recipe manager, yeah, sorry, I have no idea what's going on, but apparently YouTube is not receiving enough video for smooth streaming there. I apologize for that. So we'll make sure that our character recipe manager.update recipe list is running. And just put a debug in here with a level. And then we will put a note that we are evaluating recipe. And we will put a note that we are evaluating a skill. Okay. That looks good. I want to make sure also that our start code is running. And that our await code is running. let's just see. Check recipe.myname. And we're adding this to the recipe. I also want to see when load recipe is called. Okay, I think that's enough debug information for now. Let's just see basically where the process is breaking down and why when our character hits level 12 we're not learning the novice's blacksmithing stuff. So let's just go back and see. We have the novice's recipes. Oh, hey, look at that. You know what? I don't even think there's a problem. I think I just didn't set auto learn. Yeah, great. Okay. And in fact, normally we're going to learn these at level 8, actually, but I'm going to just set them to level 12. And in fact, let's see, just see what I set the apprentices to. No, you know what? Novices is fine. We'll actually do that at 8, because that's great. And then the apprentices stuff is actually level 12. But you know what? The apprentices stuff I should have learned anyway, because I actually did have the auto learn flag on that. So there's still something wrong with the logic here. So let's go figure out where the process is breaking down. It might be something just like our guy is just not even receiving the event. That's probably what it is. He's probably just not getting the event that he leveled up. Here we go. Good. So, uh-oh. Wow. I just got nuked. Okay, and you know the funny thing was, is I was dead, so I didn't even like get any XP from the zombie, so I never leveled up. Let's jump out to the main menu for a second. We'll just reload the game, because now that I've saved it with my character with full health, when the zombie runs over and aggroes me, he's not going to nuke me. Or maybe he will. Wow, I'm getting completely totaled here. And the zombie runs around destroying my entire base. Wow. Okay, there we go. So, the code actually ran. And wow, there was a lot of those. Okay. Okay, so I'm evaluating the recipe Novice's Claw. And at some point I should hit blacksmithing. But we don't actually go to the learn recipe. So I think I'm just gonna change the way these debugs are happening here just a little bit. We know this is happening, so that's fine. Let's put some debugs right here. So if recipe.autolearn is true, actually, you know what? Let's just put that. And then we'll put the level. And then has recipe. And finally, skill contains ability. And we'll see which of these we're failing out on. I think it might be this. I'm just wondering, like, if I just do as base ability, like, I'm wondering if because I didn't cast it properly, if that might have been the issue. But I don't think so, because then I don't think I would have learned, like, all the level 1 recipes. So I guess let's jump back into Unity here and just see what the debug messages say. Figure out which part of those statements are breaking down. Because I mean, it looks like it should work. The logic looks pretty sound. So we'll reload the game here. I'm going to turn around and run away so my zombie can get some help getting killed. Oh, okay, there we go. All right. So we got some messages now. Let's go take a look at these. So the ones I'm specifically interested in are things like the apprentice's claw. No, I'm more interested in things like the apprentice's leather. No, I'm more interested in the apprentice's plate armor. Perfect. So, okay, that's really interesting. So our character recipe manager is asking for the apprentice's plate armor to evaluate the skill blacksmithing. It's set to auto level auto learn true. The level is 12. Has recipe is false. Contains ability is true. Okay, just a second. All those conditions evaluated in such a way that we should have actually did that instead. Okay, what broke down there? So first has recipe, right? If not has recipe, okay, good. So has recipe was false. Okay. Recipe.required level is less than equal to new level. Oh, just a second. 11. Why is new level 11? That makes no sense at all. We just hit level 12. Not level 11. So the real question was this level 11 actually triggered as part of our logging into the game or not? And I'm actually curious about that. Let's log in, pause the game, and see if we have any output here. There we go, that's the key right here. Okay, so this output was all from level 11. Okay, so the evaluation is happening properly. Our character just isn't subscribing to the events, apparently. Which is kind of neat, so let's figure out what's happening there. So we'll just add some more debug messages, I guess. Oh, you know what it is? I know exactly what the problem is. Wow, this is so silly. I forgot to add the player manager to the actual player, or the player recipe manager. Let's just go back and look at that. So we have our player connection object here, and there is my character recipe manager. Let's remove that component and add the player recipe manager, and then now we should properly subscribe to the event and learn the abilities. All right, let's do it. Okay, perfect. There we go. Now that was a very large freeze up, and that's just because, you know, we had like 1,000 debug messages, and these debug messages are all doing stack traces. So that's good news. Maybe we learn the abilities now. Let's go in here and check. Excellent. I have novices, I've got apprentices, and I've got initiates. Okay, perfect. So part one, abilities automatically on levels is complete. So now we want to make the actual drops. So to do that, we're going to need a new type of item, and that's going to be called the learn recipe item or something similar like that. I'm just going to remove these debug statements here because they're no longer necessary and they make everything go really, really slow. All right, and then now we need to actually go ahead and make our new recipes. We'll just let this compile here. Actually, why don't we get rid of these debug messages too? Let that compile again. I don't know what Unity just did there. I think when I double clicked on that, I think that's a shortcut for expand all the way as far as you can. Okay, so now we actually want to create some recipe items. So we have these item classes here. These are all like items or classes that inherit from item. We have a power resource potion, which may actually be like the closest thing here. So basically what power resource potion does is it checks if you've got a power resource and then uses it. This is pretty similar to what we're going to do. We need to check if you've got basically, do you know the recipe, and second, do you have the crafting skill associated with the recipe so that you can learn it. And then, yeah, so that's good. So we'll just Control D to duplicate the power resource potion here. We will call this recipe item, for lack of a better word, because we already have recipe as a class. And then we will open up our recipe item and we will call it recipe item. The file name is recipe item. The menu name is recipe item. Set the header to recipe item. And we need a recipe name. Then we need an actual reference to the recipe. So in our setup scriptable objects, if our recipe name is not null, then we'll get a reference to the recipe from the system recipe manager.myInstance.getResource based on the recipe name. If the TMP recipe does not equal null, then our recipe can be equal to the TMP recipe, and this is actually recipe item. Could not find recipe if we couldn't find it, and looking for the recipe name while initializing my display name, which is the name of this recipe item. Okay, perfect. So that will get the reference to this. Now, for the get summary, what we want to do is just return actually our recipes get summary. And actually, you know what I'm going to do? Let's actually just Control Z that for a second. I changed my mind. What I want to do is, if the recipe isn't null, then this is just going to say recipe, and let's see here. We want /n right here, and then the 0, and then we want recipe.getSummary. Okay, I think that'll work. And then finally, when we use this, we need to perform the check first. Actually, and you know what else I want to do here? I want to see if I already know the recipe or not. So in fact, I want two strings here, and the first one should be the already known string. So the string, already known string, is string.empty. Then if player manager.myInstance.myCharacter.RecipeList.contains value, recipe, then the already known string equals, and in this case we actually want color equals red, and then just already known, and we will want a /n after it. So this will say already known and color equals red. So now we'll know that this is a recipe and whether or not we already know it. Okay. Now, in this case, if we can't use it, we're just going to say, you already know this recipe. So here, we're actually just going to do the exact same check. So if our player manager recipe.contains, if not, then we're allowed to use it. So let's just go down and see what item.use does. I don't think it actually does anything. Right, just checks character class requirements. Okay, so we actually do need that. Perfect. And then what we want to do here is basically actually just like learn the recipe. So we actually need to do one more check here. If the character has the right skill. For that, I think I actually want to add another check right here. We have already known. And how about a second string called ability known? And we'll put that in there. And then we'll have ability known string. And then let's see. This will be the ability known string, and I want it either white or red. So if we know the ability, this will be white, otherwise it'll be red, and we actually want the ability name in there. So if player manager.myInstance.myCharacter.character ability manager dot my ability list dot contains recipe dot and in this case we want the recipe dot craftability. So here, if we contain it, we'll say requires recipe list.craftability in white, and otherwise we will say the same thing in red to let us know, do we know the recipe and do we know the ability required to use the recipe. So then we'll do similar logic right here. And what we will do is, if the player knows it, then we can learn the recipe. So player manager.myInstance.myCharacter.recipe manager.learn recipe. Otherwise, to learn this recipe, you must know recipe.craftability. Okay, that looks good. So now we have the recipe item class. Let's just let everything compile and see if that works. Oh, and I guess The other thing that we need to do when we use certain things, we're supposed to remove them from our inventory. So if we look at, for example, currency item, there, we have this remove call. And let's just go check. I think that's in the base. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we'll just call remove. If we used it, if we learned it, then we can just remove this item from our inventory. Okay, we'll let that compile. And then we'll want to actually go create some recipe items. So I have created a folder structure already for those. So we can create AnyRPG somewhere. I've got items. Inventory item, recipe item. Create AnyRPG. Inventory items, recipe item. Okay, good. So this recipe item will be called, let's see, we're going to be dropping the miners equipment. So miners plate pauldrons. And I'm just going to call this recipe item. We'll set the resource name to miners plate pauldrons recipe. And the recipe name is miners plate pauldrons. It's pretty much the only thing we have to do, I think. And then I'll just make one piece of each set. Or I mean one basically recipe for each items. So we have the miners plate pauldrons, we have the miners plate bracers. We have the miners plate girdle. We have the miners plate boots. We have the miners plate gloves. We have the miners plate armor. We have the miners plate legs, I think. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, miner's plate legs. Okay. And I have armor, boots, bracers, girdles, gloves, legs, pauldrons. Helm is what I'm missing. Okay. So we need the miner's plate helm recipe item. We'll call that the miner's plate helm recipe. And the reason we actually need to put the word recipe onto this is because we already have a type of item called the miner's plate helm, which is actually like the miner's plate helm item itself. And because they're both children of the base class item, the names here need to be unique. However, because recipe is a different class, that's why miner's plate helm is actually just there, just as the word. Okay, so now I got a bunch of recipes and I want a way to drop them. So we've got a Birch Grove loot table here. And I'm just going to add another loot group at the end here. We're going to set the drop limit to 8, and we're going to set the loot size to 1 real quick here, and then just add in miner's plate armor, and then I'm going to set the loot size down to 8. Miners, oh, and you know what? This should actually say recipe. So we're just going to set that to 1 and then back to 8. Then everything should have the word recipe. So we have the miner's plate bracers recipe, the miner's plate boots recipe, the miner's plate girdle recipe, the miner's plate helm recipe, the miner's plate gloves recipe, the miner's plate legs recipe, and the miner's plate pauldrons recipe. Okay, perfect. So now that I've added all that gear to the loot table, or all that stuff to the loot table for Birch Grove, and I set basically 8 guaranteed drops. We're going to ignore the drop chance basically. We'll set this to guaranteed drop, and we'll ignore the global drop limit. And now I should get all of the recipes for the miner's plate gear as soon as I kill that zombie. So let's go try that out. Okay, so we're going to load up our game here. We got our ranger. Our ranger is going to heal himself a little bit, and I think I died last time, so I actually want to cast his rock fist buff on him so that he can own this zombie a little better. We're actually just going to save that, and then we're going to go blind the zombie, pull him into the base, and then just destroy him with our rock fist. Alright, and then let's take a look at our loot table. Okay, so what do we got here? We have a null reference. Let's figure out what happened. First, I'm just going to get rid of these debugs right here. Actually, you know what? I kind of want to learn recipe because I want to see if we call that. Okay, so essentially our zombie, we tried to get some currency for him and it didn't exist. So if we look at our zombie unit here, there's a lootable character class right here, and we have automatic currency set. So it very much should have existed. This may have something to do with the fact that he doesn't have a toughness. So basically, we would have passed in an empty currency node. Which we would have called from here. Okay, that's really odd because we actually do check if the currency doesn't equal null before we do that. Oh, you know what? Just a second. What was actually null here? Icon.sprite. So we passed in a null icon. Okay, so basically at some point we created a loot drop. We passed in a null icon to it. There's no point at which we ever set that icon, meaning that it's always going to be null. And that's useless because it's not actually searching for that icon class. Okay, I think the easiest way to just fix this for now is that if icon does not equal null, then set the icon sprite. I will worry about exactly what's happening there a little later. So we're going to drag the zombie over here again. Wow, and we still have a null reference in there. Okay. Okay, I need to, you know what, I think I actually do need to solve this properly. So basically, let's see. Icon is always going to be null. How do we pass in the real icon? Let me just close a bunch of this stuff here and see. At some point, we need to actually go into the loot UI. I think that's going to be where this needs to happen. Okay, so we are setting the value of the sprite when we create the page to the value of our loot drops my icon. So the value of our loot drops my icon should be set at that point, I think. Which should return the icon.sprite. Okay, so the problem is actually because of the fact that we have this image up here. This is actually because of the code that I did earlier in order to allow us to basically like backfill the icon through the quest experience scaling. And this is one of the unintended consequences or basically side effects of that change is the fact that we had to send in an image into that function to get it to set the icon properly. So that means that this needs to be a reference to an actual image so that that can return the value. So let's see, the best way to deal with this, I think, let's just look at the loot UI here. We need to transfer the sprite back to here. Okay, so this is actually a really interesting problem. I'm not sure exactly what to do about it at this point. Because this function right here I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have currency converter.recalculate values return something a little bit different. I think I'm going to have it return an object . In fact, actually, maybe I'll just have it return a key value pair. I think that would work a lot better, and we'll have it return the key value pair of a sprite and a string. And so let's see. So what we want is a sprite, return sprite, and we will set our return sprite equal to that value. And then we will return, and I think I can do a new key value pair. just a second. You know what? How do I set key value pair in C#? I don't use this too often. Okay, there we go. I just need to put some brackets after it and throw the values in. Okay, no worries. So this is a sprite string, so we want return sprite and then the string. Okay. That means that we should not need to pass in the icon anymore. Now this is going to cause a few errors, and I'm just going to fix those as they come. Let's clear that up and see what the actual errors are here. Okay. Recalculate values does not need the null thing anymore. And here we're just wanting to operate on the string, which is the key. No, which is the value. And here we actually do want to set the icon. No, we don't. This is just for take loot. I don't even think we need to send it in at that point. So I think we can just do that, and then similarly, we're just trying to get the value here, the string. So we should be able to do that. Okay, here we go. Perfect. So this is where we actually want to set the text and the icon. Perfect. What we'll do here is we will do new key value pair of and what is this thing delivering us again? A sprite and a string. So sprite string key value pair equals currency converter dot recalculate all this stuff. Then currency loot button dot my icon dot sprite equals key value pair dot key. And the text is key value pair dot value and then we don't need to send in the icon right here. Okay, so now let's see here. Let's let that compile. Good, and so now our loot drop, let's see, we want the loot UI, And we're going to set that to the myIcon value, which is the sprite on the pages. I still feel like that's going to be null. Okay, let's you know what? Let's just jump back into the game, and I just want to see if we get any more error messages out of there. Okay, so we do. So what do we want to do here? We actually need to set the sprite at some point. Which means that realistically we actually want this to be a sprite icon. And when we add a currency node and we recalculate the values, it's really neat that it's allowing us to set an icon in a true-false value. But essentially, okay, so what we want to do is we want to set our icon equal to, we'll set that to true, and then this is dot key. Okay, so now our recalculation should return the sprite that we can properly set as the sprite, and then return that and set somebody else's image based on that. Okay, hopefully that works. It was a bit of a mess the way that I refactored that code in the last episode when I added the gold scaling to the quest, and all this icon versus sprite stuff was just like a side effect of that. So I think this code is a little cleaner, it'll work a little better, and we can kind of share that functionality hopefully without it breaking. So let's load our game up here. We're going to go to our zombie. We're going to aggro him. We're going to blind him, cast a heal on ourselves, and then nuke him. Okay. That is a little better. Kind of. So I do see the recipe here. I do not see the icon for the thing, and also the text right here is messed up as well. For some reason we're not getting text back. So let's fix the text first. I think what we actually want to do is set the summary. So here I think we just need to do the same thing. We need to make a key value pair of sprite string key value pair equals currency converter dot recalculate values. Icon equals key value pair dot key. Summary equals key value pair dot value. I don't think we have any references to log summary since that's now a dynamically recalculated string. Okay, that means we should probably properly set the summary now. Okay, now for the recipe items, we weren't properly showing the recipe. So let's see if we can figure out what's going on there. The recipe dropped, but it was not properly shown. Okay. We have the setup scriptable objects. We should have gotten a reference to the item. Oh, you know what? I know why we didn't. No, maybe I don't. Okay. Recipe items are items, which means we had the ability to grab them. They're an override of setup scriptable objects, so we should have been able to set the reference. I just want to make sure that this is even running. Maybe recipe just doesn't have a fantastic summary. Oh, you know what? And also, actually I know exactly why it was showing white. It's because we didn't even set an icon on it. That's so silly. So if we look at this, at the recipe item, as soon as this thing compiles, you'll see I've got no icon, and I'm also not using any sort of regional description here. So I would actually have to set the description or set the icon normally. So to do that, let's look through the icons here, and I'm just going to look for a couple of different things. What do we want for a recipe? We have a couple of types of paper. We have got a couple of types of scrolls. We're using these scrolls for basically like the scrolls that actually do things. This one's kind of cool, but that's more like a quest log. To be totally honest, I'm actually liking these ones right here, these scroll underscore squares. But at the same time, I'm kind of liking this guy right here. I think I'm going to go with this one because this one actually has writing on it. So I'm going to make a new resource description for the, I'm just going to call this recipe icon, I guess. So we'll select all those and we'll put in recipe icon. And then we'll make a resource description for that so that I can regionalize this. So I will call this resource description recipe icon. Just going to copy any old other resource description. And we'll choose the scroll square here just for now. We'll save that, and actually, you know what? I'm going to go with this scroll. I like it. That is a beautiful scroll, and I think I actually prefer that. So yeah, good. Now we have a recipe icon. Okay, so all of our things have their recipes set, and now what we have to deal with is the fact that recipe.getSummary kind of sucks. Because basically our recipes don't really have a description. So I think I want to do something a little different there. I want to do recipe.myoutput.getSummary. And what that'll do is that'll grab the description of the item that the recipe creates, which is more what I'm looking for. Okay, so hopefully that will have fixed the two issues with the loot not showing the proper amount and with the recipe not having an icon. And then we can go test that and make sure that works. Or this is a debug.log error. That was kind of silly. We don't want to log errors here when we're letting us know that we're running this stuff, because that will pause everything. At least as long as you've got error pause enabled, which I do, because I like to see errors as they happen. Okay, so one more time. Aggro the zombie. Blind the zombie. And destroy the zombie. Okay, there we go. Much better. 6 silver and miner's plate pauldrons. Oh, wow, that's so cool. Okay, let's take another look at that. Miner's plate pauldrons recipe, no sell price. Recipe requires blacksmithing ability. Required classes, warrior. Oh, this is really fantastic. Okay. Here where I have requires, we'll want to change that. This should see craftability dot my display name, because otherwise it's just so showing us the name of the item. Cool. Okay, let's take that and look in our bag. Oh, there it is right there. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Let's just take all the loot. We got a pile of recipes now. Okay, good. So let's save the game. And what I want to do is just reload it and make sure that the description is working. And then I want to go over to the anvil and check if my character properly learns the recipes, if they can be removed from his bags, if they are persistent between saves, etc. So let's load them back up with the, oh, you know what I totally forgot? I forgot to actually save those changes. So we'll let those save, we'll let Unity compile, do its thing here. It's still compiling. And I'm just going to get rid of these debug messages as well, because they're not really needed. Okay, so checking in my bags, I still have the recipes, and now it properly says requires blacksmithing. Okay, let's head over to the anvil here. And we can see I've got initiates, I've got novices, and I have apprentices, but I do not have minors. So we will save the game. We will click on the recipe, and of course nothing happened. It didn't get removed from our bags. Nothing's going on. I look at my system. I don't see anything. Okay. So, I meet all the requirements for this, I'm pretty sure. So let's see if we can figure out what's happening here. When I look at the recipe item, we've got a use function. So I want to make sure that that's even being called. And then item, I think, will deal with the right clicks. You know what? It might even not. It may not. Oh, you know what? Because it's not item that deals with the right clicks. It's actually the loot slot itself that deals with the right clicks. So anyway, we'll just check, make sure that that's in there. Now, oh, you know what? Look at this. No, that's right. My character ability manager. Okay, let's just write some more debugs here, I guess. So my display name plus dot recipe item dot use, and let's see. if we got to this spot, it's because player does not have the recipe name. Okay, then we want to check basically what happened here. What happened if we got here was basically base item returned false. And we don't really care about this because we'll get a message feed manager if nothing else was available there. All right, let's try that. I'm interested to see just like, are we even receiving the right-click event or not? If we are receiving the right-click event, then we should be calling use, and we should be able to see that debug message there. Okay, so right-click, nothing happens. So I can move it around, but nothing happening at all. Okay, and like I don't see anything happening, nothing, zip zilch nada, not even a single like, hey, you right-clicked on me. So let's figure out why not. We've got a slot script here, and our slot script is where we're receiving this right-click. Let's just see if I can find the code for that. Handle right-click. So we want to know, first of all, did we get a right-click? And handle right-click is called from on pointer click. Okay, so far so good. Now our bags are not closed. We're not a bank panel. Okay, so we don't need to move items. This will allow us to sell items. Otherwise, we should be calling use. Okay. So we'll write a note about to use item. Then let's go to the definition of use item. You know what? I may have actually forgot to put the iUsable. That might actually be my problem. Let's see, if I go to the implementation of all of the items, yeah, castable is iUsable. Basically, any base class of item that you can actually use just has to be iUsable. And iUsable just basically means you've got a use method. So very likely that was the reason why I couldn't learn those things, because I just didn't set the right interface on that. So it's been a long time since I made a usable item. I totally even forgot I had that interface and that it was necessary. Okay, let's try this again. Miner's plate legs. Ooh, look at that. It disappeared from my bag. And if I go over to the anvil, just a second. Was that the legs or the pauldrons? Maybe that was the pauldrons. No, hold on. I have miner's plate. You know what? I think I put the wrong names in the recipes. Let's just go confirm that here, because if we have miner's plate star recipe item. Okay, this is armor, boots, bracers, girdle, gloves, helm. Ah, look at that, legs. This should say legs, not pauldrons. Okay, pauldrons, legs, helm, gloves, girdle, bracers, boots, armor. Perfect. Everything looks good. And the last thing that I want to do there, I don't need these on pointer clicks anymore because it was just the missing interface was the reason why I couldn't do anything with them. I don't need the handle right click anymore. I don't need about to use item anymore. And we don't need that. That's fine. We don't need that either. Okay, so I want to put a message that we learned the recipe. You learned the recipe. Recipe dot my display name. And I don't think we need an exclamation mark after that. Okay, let's try that one more time. And let's see, message feed. Yeah, message feed is good. I want this to pop up like in yellow on the screen. And also in the bag, I actually want these things to have a white background. And in order to do that, I actually need to give them a common item quality. In fact, actually, to be totally honest, you know what I'm thinking? I actually want to give them a rare item quality because these recipes are for rare gear. So why don't we make rare recipes have a rare background? That way they'll have a blue background and you'll see that they're special. This is not your beginner's gear. This is the dropped gear that's gonna, oh yeah, beautiful. Look at that. We got some nice blue recipes here. Miner's plate boots recipe. Yeah, okay, I'm loving that. All right, so finally, I'm going to learn the miner's plate legs recipe. You learned the recipe, miner's plate legs, perfect. You learned the recipe, miner's plate legs, awesome. Now I can go in here, I can look at my miner's plate legs, and I can see my miner's plate legs, and if I had a bronze ingot, I would be able to craft them right now. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have successfully done it. We have made recipes as items that can drop. Now let's just save the game, and what I want to ensure is that when I reload this thing, I still have my miner's plate legs recipe, and that I could actually use it. Just get rid of some of those debug messages. Let this recompile. Load up our game again. Go back over to the anvil, and there's our miner's plate legs. Perfect. So now we can successfully drop gear. Like say for example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all this miner's gear in the dungeon, and then what'll happen is basically at any given level you can make a green set of gear, and you can go into the dungeon and you can get the recipes to make the blue set of gear for that level by getting them as drops in the dungeon. So as always, I hope you enjoyed that. That was really fun to make, and I've been looking forward to adding that feature for a very, very, very long time. So if you did enjoy it, don't forget to thumbs up the video, subscribe to the AnyRPG YouTube channel, or just leave a note in the comments. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.